Welcome to Moments with Rozarte, the podcast. Through creative storytelling, we highlight the importance of mental wellness and community connections. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals and organizations that are making a difference. On today's episode, we have Rivinius. He's a successful producer, writer, and mix engineer who has worked with global artists including BTS, Taylor Swift, Alicia Keys, and Eminem. In this podcast, he takes us through his journey as an artist and all the lessons he's learned so far.
Hi, Dom. First of all, on the behalf of our entire Rozarte team, I'd like to thank you for accepting an invitation to joining us for this interview and for agreeing to be part of the first edition of Rozarte magazine.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so let's get started from the very beginning, Dom. What was the first thing that inspired you to pick up drums or any of the musical instruments?
Yeah. Well, that story is kind of I think the way that everyone starts in the beginning. Like I grew up in the country in Germany, Southwest Germany, in the middle of nowhere, and there is like village after village after village, and none of these villages have more than maybe 2,000 people living there. And I was growing up in one of them, and you have all these groups of people within that village that do stuff together. Some play music like a tiny orchestra, others play soccer or whatever. There's all kinds of things. And one day I was visiting one of these concerts of that village orchestra. It was nothing special from like a mature standpoint, but I was 10 years at the time. And for whatever reason, I immediately fell in love with the part that the drummer was playing. Like I was immediately drawn to the drumming, the instrument, the player, and yeah, just I don't know what exactly. It was just a feeling. And at that moment, I remember distinctly, like I grabbed my mother's arm, and I said, "Mom, I want to learn that too." And I cannot explain. I never had a moment like that in my entire life afterwards. Like that
Mm-hmm.
certainty, I know exactly I want to learn that. But at that moment, it just happened. And yeah, I was lucky that my parents actually allowed me to learn the drums because, as you can imagine, it's not the most comfortable instrument to live around when you get starts learning the drum.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, so what it sounds like is that was you found something at a very young age that you could connect up with really well and that you could really uh, make your own thing, and you had a good support system there too with your parents being supportive for that passion.
Yes, I mean, I was always super curious to learn and try new things, even as a kid. But that was something different for whatever reason. I don't know what it was with that instrument, but I just knew I had to learn it. And it's not that I was super motivated afterwards. Like I was not practicing for probably years until I started getting serious. It was just that initial spark, and then it all grew from there. But yeah, my parents obviously played a big role in that. I know that a lot of families don't have that situation where it's very supportive. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, I can say even like when you grow up in the country, you have to be as a kid, your parents have to drive you everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they also did that for me. Like when I had my first band later on with I think age 16, and that was like, I don't know, 10 miles away. They drove me there twice a week for rehearsal and picked me up again afterwards. And that's stuff that I don't take for granted. That definitely helped.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Even in my practice as a counselor, when I'm working with the younger kids, so I provide therapy services to elementary students who are aged from 4 to 12. And
Hmm.
most of my practice involves utilization of music or other unconventional techniques like sports or something. So I take a lot of my kids outdoors and make them play soccer because that's something I grew up with. And that's something
Hmm.
that helped me with my stresses when I was young. And a lot of those kids, through their stories, they tell me that how just they never knew that they had this passion and this love for the game before these sessions, and how like this was just some untapped talent or some untapped love that they had never experienced.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have a situation or grow up or live in a situation where you can try things and you're actually encouraged to try things. Like, I mean, as a kid, you're not necessarily thinking, oh, I want to try the unicycle or I want to try juggling, or somebody has to like push you towards that direction and say, why don't you try that? Um, yeah, I mean, a lot of that is in the parents' work of bringing their kids up, really.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Very
can
true.
only do so much as a kid.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you may have seen in your experiences with folks around you who are part of the music industry, how important do you think is the support system for anyone who's starting up new, or even for the youngest ones, like, someone who's 10 or 12 years old? How important is a role model figure or a support figure who pushes you to pursue those talents or to pursue those passions?
Well, I mean, this is difficult for me to say because I had very supportive parents. I would argue, though, that it's not, I wouldn't take it as an excuse if you don't have that. I mean, I cannot speak about any super difficult situations like growing up on the streets or in a ghetto or in a country where there is no basic living situation. I don't know anything about that. But when you have like a Western culture and you are kind of raised in that scenario, um, most of it still has to come from within. Because the other aspect that I can tell you is I am and I've always been super driven and I wanted to excel at stuff. That's just something that I wanted to do. And I always it always got to a point where it became a little like it's always a balance. There's a healthy side to it and there is a less healthy side to it when you compare yourself too much and you get over competitive. And I was balancing that line for sure for a while. And sometimes I fell closer on that side, sometimes I fell over on the other side. But it's a personality thing because no matter the situation, I mean, there was difficult situations for me too, and no parents or anything else could have helped with that. You will encounter problems no matter how strong your situation in the beginning is. So yeah, you have to have a certain strength from the inside. That's just, yeah.
That's a very beautiful way to put it, like have strength from the inside. And that's something that, like, our goal with this whole project is also like, building resiliency, because I
Mm,
believe that resiliency is much more important than any other thing in, like, in our life
yeah,
when we are progressing towards our goals. So,
I would agree.
mhm. Yeah, so for any of the young listeners listening up, how would you tell them to stop, not give up on their passions and to to continue pursuing them?
Hmm. Um, well, let me start by saying I find it a super hard environment today with social media. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not against innovation or anything. That's not the lane I want to go in here. But um, as somebody who grew up without social media and the internet just came around when I was like 5 or 10 years old, then it became slowly a mass adopted thing. Um, you did not have all the distractions and the difficult distractions, like the dangerous distractions that you have nowadays. Nobody was in front of you with a reel or a YouTube short or a TikTok every day putting like a picture in your mind of how your life has to look like. That's something that today kills a lot of dreams because it raises so much inferiority complexes in people and all that. It's important to understand that we did not have that 20 years ago. And I think, I don't know, but I think if if you wanted to copy the way that I have walked on as closely as possible, my first tip would be to reduce social media time by 99%.
It's true.
Um, and stop consuming stuff that's not stop consuming stuff that you don't choose deliberately. And
Mm-hmm.
instead replace that by working on your own stuff, on your passion, whatever that is, dancing, painting, writing poems, organizing things, can be very intellectual or creative, can be anything really, but work on that stuff and choose to feed your brain from the youngest age, not with random TikToks about funny pranks or stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Feed your brain with role models that are really excelling in that passion. Watch videos on YouTube about dancers, great choreography, stuff like that. Read books about it. Go back to reading books. Can be ebooks if you like
Mm-hmm.
that more. But what I'm getting at is, don't feed your brain with so much unintentional random stuff, because that does all kinds of shit to your brain that you don't get out easily, and that distracts you and maybe makes you give up your passion altogether.
Completely agreed with you. I keep telling my kids, even in the therapy sessions, that social media, one thing that it's doing is it's decreasing the attention span. Your
Mm.
attention is just getting lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser, and that's causing up even more stresses in learning environment, in keeping up passions, because then you start comparing yourself with someone else on the media, and it just becomes really difficult.
Mm.
You grew up in a time when social media was slowly becoming big or was slowly expanding. How did
Mm.
you manage, and did you ever felt that you were missing out on something, or missing out on a new technology, or something new? Because that's another thing that the younger generation faces a lot.
Well, Facebook became a thing, I think, when I was around 16, 17, 18 years old. And what I can tell you is I was already at a point where I was pretty settled with, like, I started pursuing the drumming path very seriously at the age of close to 15, probably, like end of 14 years old, starting to become 15. And I started practicing like 3 hours every day for years. And then when you have that foundation and then slowly social media comes into play, it does not take over your life, because the foundation is something different.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you grow up with social media as the foundation of your life, and I wanted to touch on what you just said earlier, the attention span. Um, that's something, a little bit of real talk here. You have to understand that if you're not able to concentrate for long periods of time anymore, you are not able to build a skill to the level that anybody else who has the attention span is able to build that. Like at the end, between 18, 20, 21 years old, my daily practice plan was 6 hours, 6 hours a day. And you have to be concentrated for 6 hours. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
there were breaks, but it was usually like 2 hours, then 15 minutes break, 2 hours, 15 minutes, something like that. And if you cannot do that, you will not get to the point where you can compete to the people who are able to do that. So that's something very important to understand, because everyone who wants to build their dreams has to understand what they're up against. You're not only up against your own peer group, you're up against all the people who are already established, and they have decades of experience before you and very focused experience. So at least be aware of that fact when you like make somewhat realistic plans and an outlook for the future. That's super important, because every saying anything else would be fooling you.
Definitely. I completely agree. I feel like creating up a structure, creating up a plan is extremely important, but what is also important is being responsible enough and being accountable enough of following up with that plan. Uh, a lot of folks that I see create up a plan on the new year or during something big that's coming up, but they fail to follow up on that plan
Mm,
because of, again, coming back to the same thing, distractions or
right,
something else
right,
that probably causes up the hiccups.
right. But
Um,
sometimes to add on that, I have that too. I set a lot of goals and I abandon them all the time, just to give the full picture again, because setting goals is not easy. And what's also true is sometimes when you set a goal and you find along the way that it's not the smartest goal to pursue anymore, or other information comes into play, it sometimes makes sense to abandon those goals. In another podcast, I was just talking about that exact phenomenon, and I would rather say it's important to have a North Star in front of you so that you know which direction you want to head in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the like the smaller goals, stuff like this year I wanna, I don't know, paint 10 paintings, or this month I want to paint 10 paintings, and then you fall short or something else comes up. That's not as important as always remembering you want to be a painter in the end.
Mm-hmm. Focusing on the main goal and not letting yourself be getting
Right,
distracted if little
right,
hiccups come up along the way, but keeping your
exactly.
focus on the main goal.
And also not the other side of it is not being demotivated if you cannot keep up with the goal, because that's what happens. You're not reaching one of the goals, you're abandoning another one, and sooner than you might like it, you're the guy who always doesn't reach your goal.
Mm-hmm.
And don't take that too seriously because it's life. It's just what happens in life. It happened to me all the time. It didn't keep me from working on a couple really, really cool things. And yeah, don't, that's also something that comes from the social media pressure, I think, is like that goes way too much into a serious thing. Like you have to have plans all the time. You have to know exactly what to do with your life. That's way too much stress. Like take a step back, understand where you want to go, and then actually enjoy the process of getting there and be cool with sometimes not knowing what's happening.
Very true. Yeah. Take a step back, refocus, look at what your main goal was, and then start going back at it again. Very true.
Right. Right.
So you were introduced to music or your passion started up when you were young, when you were 10 years old. And then you mentioned that you started actively practicing drumming when you were 15. Can you tell us more about how your journey began from there?
Yeah, there was a little more details on the way. I mean, I grew up in a little more than usual musical household. My mother played piano and sang in the choir. My father did a little bit of music stuff. So I got in touch with instruments very early on. I think I sat in front of a piano before I was a year old. So drums were not my initial spark. It was just the spark. Um, but yeah, I practiced here and there when I started. I was a usual instrumental student that you could have as a drum teacher. Um, well, things always came together for me pretty quickly. I was a pretty fast learner, that I want to give you. But other than that, I was not crazy dedicated in the beginning. I usually did not practice too much because everything worked almost without practicing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, at one point I felt like, okay, if I put work into this, it can really become a thing. And that was around 15 years old. And then like I said, I started practicing. My North Star at that point was I wanted to become a drummer, one that plays with either his own band touring, like the rock star
Mm-hmm.
vision, or I wanted to be one of the touring drummers, touring with one of the big acts around the world. That was the vision for me. Um, and I didn't know how to get there. The only thing I knew is I have to work on my skills all the time because I'm not good enough yet with 15 years old to fulfill that role. So I have to work on that. But for a very long time, nothing else happened. And I did not feel like getting closer to that goal other than getting better at the instrument. Um, so at, I think, 16 years old, mid 16, when I was already practicing pretty crazy in my perception, for over a year, with nothing happening, I was like, okay, so I I want to find a band soon, or I don't know how long I want to keep doing this. Yeah, and then I found a band um, in my school. We started playing a couple of things, just having fun. It was nothing serious. Again, it was just enjoying the process. Yeah, and from there, I mean, I don't want to extend the story too long. It's a very long story, but
That's fine. Feel
uh,
free.
oh, yeah, over the years, I, I think I was part of over 50 bands or so,
Oh, wow.
in all different kinds of genres and like big band stuff, jazz bands, rock, punk bands, covers, originals, everything, blues, with all age ranges as well, as far as the other band members go. And that all goes back to me being just curious and wanting to be one of the best in my field because I thought, well, the more I do, the more I learn, the more experiences I gain. When I play a big band and get very good at it, my pop or rock drumming jobs um, will be stronger than any other rock drummers who has never played big band before because I can pull from that. That was always my general thought, and you can distill it down to, well, I wanted to do everything to get better at what I'm doing all the time. That was the sole focus. Um, yeah, and that's like one thing came to another until today. Life has taken so many detours and so many uncertainties, of course, but that was the starting point for everything that came later on.
Isn't that what's life all about? Like, different changes, different things, different experiences. And I guess wherever you have reached today is because of your hard work and because of your resilience and of your curiosity of learning more and more and different things and excelling at different projects.
Yeah, I mean, it's always easier to say stuff like that, like life is all about that when you have a little bit of distance afterwards. When you're in those situations, it feels pretty desperate
It
all the
does.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but it's true when you look back, not everything. Like there were definitely moments in my life where I wasted months or years with just nonsense. But I didn't know better and I didn't know where I belong at the time, and I just had to try and figure out the way. And
But again,
it didn't work.
I feel like those were your learning experiences. You learn from those moments where, like, you probably were not doing a lot of things or you were not getting involved in those projects, but still you were building up resiliency, you were building up different skills in those times that helped
Right.
you excel into the different projects when you started becoming more and more focused on your career and towards your North Star.
Yes, and you always at least learn what you don't want to do because that's also super important. Especially nowadays, everyone thinks, well, that was true when I was in school as well, but especially nowadays, still, I think there is this idea that you have to know what you want to do right away because everyone else seems to know what they want to do with their full life. You have to have all that full plan of your life laid out in front of you before you even started college or anything. And it's impossible. The At least for me, the only way I could find out all the things that I don't want to do, I had to try them. And I'm not talking about music stuff. Like I tried marketing things and digital careers, like insurance stuff almost, like I
Wow.
dabbled into a lot of things and tried them for a couple of weeks but always seriously, like never half-assed, like I always jumped into it full force. But usually pretty quickly I found, no, this is not it. This is not it. This is not it. But at that time, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was music. I felt pretty desperate about music and that, yeah, I wanted that for so many years. Now I don't want it anymore. But what do I want? That was my situation for, I would say, from 22 to 26, probably. I felt exactly like that. I was not sure I want to be a musician, not at all.
Wow. Well, at least you were being curious. You were trying to explore and experiment and learn more about yourself and about, like, what's connecting, what's not connecting. And that's
Right.
also a very important aspect of growth in life because sometimes what happens is we think we like something, we try doing it, we struggle with it, and then we think that's it, that's the end of the world. We can't do anything
Mhm.
else if we can't just do something that we like. But the
Mhm.
importance is, as you said, like, just being curious, just being inventive, just trying to learn different things or learning more about yourself, about, like, what you
Right.
like, what you dislike, what you're good at, what you're not good at. um,
Right.
were there any specific individuals or mentors who played a big role in defining your life path, aside from your parents and your family members?
I would say my drumming teacher, definitely, because he was paramount in the way that he I only know that now looking back, but he did not only teach me playing the drums, he also gave me all these soft skills that helped me build my way as a drummer, not only the playing, but at one point, for example, he had a gig, like a concert, and he could not attend because his son was ill, and he needed an emergency replacement. So he called me because at the time I was the person best fitting for the job. I was already at a level where he could ask me, and he sent me as his replacement, and that was my first paid drumming job, you know. Um, and that at that point, I mean, you're thrown into the water and it does not feel great because you feel like, oh shit, can I do that? You're super anxious, you're nervous, and that's normal. That's just part of the game. And yeah, all kinds of these things. He brought me together with a couple people because he thought it might be good to connect with them and maybe start something together. And all like all these aspects about networking, and it's a people's business and how you have to navigate. He never talked about that, but the way he put me in places um kind of nurtured that understanding within myself, and only now looking back I see how that came together.
It's true,
Yeah.
very true.
And of course, because you asked about important role models later on, at age 28, I found another mentor who, uh, well, kind of lifted me up to the level where I am today in the music industry world. And that is, you, you don't always have role models or idols like that along your whole life path, but sometimes they pop up. And I think, first of all, you have to be aware so that you don't miss it. Um, and second, you have to see when that lucky situation strikes you that you can be the student again.
Hmm.
Um, and then you have to give it your all and not like you have to leave the ego aside and don't feel entitled to, well, I'm already 28 and now this and that, now I make the rules. That's not how it works at all. You have to understand, okay, I'm here, this person is here and he is able to lift me up if I put in the effort and the work and if I'm humble enough. Um, and if you're able to do that, then you have a great situation going on. So for me, those two people were, I would say, the biggest pillars of yeah, where I'm in life, really.
So Dom, going back on what you just mentioned about real life experiences and being on the ground and seeing what's actually happening and learning from those real life experiences, I think it's important that we speak a little bit more about that, because even in my experience as an undergrad, when I was doing undergrad in digital media or my master's in counseling, there was a lot of concepts that were taught in classes and in school and in college, but life outside, when you're actually on the ground, it's completely different, and it's
Mm.
important to be able to make yourself ready for it. So when you actually stepped into the ground and when you started working with all these professional folks, how difficult was it for you to navigate into that zone?
It's great that you're talking about that because it's one of the most important aspects, I think. It's one of my passion topics. And I was just talking with a great friend yesterday about this exact same thing. Um, well, first thing I want to say is I dropped out of music college, or it's called differently in Germany, but the equivalent, um, because of that. Um, because I saw very early on that it's just too schematic and not really, yeah, it's not working. It's almost colliding with the actual way that you want to build your career on. Um, it is the most important thing to get experience on the streets. And with the exception of very, very few fields like doctors or lawyers or engineers, stuff where you really have to learn in-depth intricacies of a field, or otherwise you would endanger people, something. Those fields are super important to learn all the details in a theoretical way, and then only then start applying them. But everything else, I would always suggest learning on the streets and learning from the people who are actually putting that stuff into action on the streets. Because way too often in college, the people teaching you are college teachers. They're not doing what they teach, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
So it's so weird to me. And it's the weirdest thing. You already said it. Like, it's so different from from the real world experiences. So whenever you can collect those real world experiences and just build your skill set through that, and first of all, what happens is you get very secure about your own skills and the way you do things, and that helps you build so much inner strength, because you know how things are done, because you have
Mm-hmm.
seen it. You have not
Mm-hmm.
learned or read about it, you have seen it, and you have done it yourself, maybe. And that makes all the difference, because then somebody else comes to you and criticizes your work, and you understand it's only his taste or his opinion, but
His
it's not a
opinion.
fact,
Mm-hmm.
because you know the facts. You have already seen it, not
Mm-hmm.
learned.
I, rem I
Um,
Very true. Yeah, even I remember when I was in undergrad doing digital media and learning about different cameras, learning about it from the textbook or from those slides or PowerPoints was a different thing as compared to when actually holding the camera, pressing up different buttons and seeing up, making up some mistakes here and there, and then learning up from those mistakes and like then navigating, okay, so this button does this, rather than learning it in a book or in a slide that are usually presented in schools.
100%. Because what happens is you learn that stuff, and I mean, it's good to understand how your pieces of, like, your devices work. Of course, you have to know what you're working with. But what happens, and it never happens in a textbook, but what happens in reality is, oh, okay, oh, now I know the whole lighting. I have set up the lighting, looks great, like in my textbook. I have set up the camera, everything is ready. Um, and then you want to start shooting, and suddenly the camera battery dies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your textbook did not prepare you for that,
For
did
that.
not tell you to bring an extra battery.
Mm-hmm.
Experience tells you that, because from now on, you will always have an extra battery with you.
Very true.
And
Yeah.
that is the real world things that are so much more important, honestly. Like, and if we want to talk and get back to that topic of passion, um, and the listeners who want to actually pursue their passion and maybe don't know how to go about it, um, don't make that mistake, and don't only theoretically learn about something. Put yourself on the playing field, really. Be one of the people who do the thing, even if you suck at it in the beginning. That's very, very normal. And it happened for me all the time. I did
Yeah.
not start out great. Nobody did. But you have to jump into the cold water sometimes to learn how to swim, and not learn swimming before ever stepping a foot in the water.
That's very true. Yeah. Surround yourself with people who are doing that. Surround yourself with folks who are excelling in doing that so that you can brush off from their experiences, from their skills, because you must have worked with a lot of high-end producers and you must have seen them also messing up on their projects here and there. And that's a learning curve for you. That's a learning experience for you.
Right.
You mentioned that you played in over 50 bands in different genres. How did that journey lead up to working with global stars or global icons outside of Germany, like Alicia Keys, Eminem, and BTS? How did that journey come along your way?
That is where my story becomes a very individual story. And everybody will tell you the same thing, at least in those creative fields. Um, the basics are kind of the same, but there is no blueprint to achieve the exact same things. I don't know anybody who has the same story as me, and I don't know how you would be able to replicate my story. You can only take like the thought processes behind it and try to emulate the I think the thought process is really the most important thing, honestly, and the inner, like the mindset, how you approach things. And yeah. Um I I ended my drumming career aspirations when I dropped out of the music college, because I was like I was so burned out. I hated playing that instrument. I didn't want to become better at it anymore. It was just too much for me. Um, and that was when I totally lost myself in not knowing where I belong instead, because that was my life, and that was my North Star, and I knew where I was going. Suddenly I didn't know anymore because I didn't want to go there. But I didn't I the alternative was not there yet. So that's when a lot of searching happened, and I touched on that earlier already a little bit, but um it was years, and I was playing the drums, and I kept doing it because it brought in my livelihood. Um, but it was only earning money, and I also enjoyed it, but it was just doing it because of a necessity. It was not me aiming at my bigger passion anymore, because it was not my bigger passion anymore. Um, and with all those detours, after years and years, I came back to, well, I dabbled into music production, and I understood, okay, it seems to be the thing where I want to be after all. I see my task as doing whatever is necessary to take a song from what it is. It can be a crappy voice note that an artist has, just an idea on the phone, or like a piano and voice demo of a song, anything like that, or a fully fleshed out uh, production demo. And my job is to take whatever that is and make it as emotionally strong as possible, and in simple terms, as closely to commercially viable as possible. So that's my uh, job where I am seeing myself now. And there is not really a connection between the drumming path and the big projects that I'm involved nowadays, other than my drumming experiences helped me with everything I do today. And I'm only the guy who does the drum parts for these artists because I'm a drummer. But I would never have come to these projects as a drummer if I weren't a music producer. Because the network, I was only able to get into the network as a producer, but then I have to be the drummer to be the person who fulfills those jobs. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
very, very, and you can never plan that stuff. Like that's something that just happened. I mean, my thing is always putting myself into so many possible opportunity scenarios as I can, and believing that one of them will catch on. But at one point, luck has to find you. You have to help luck, or make it as easy as possible for luck to find you. But at one point, it's just out of your control.
Yeah, I also feel like for the luck to find you, you also need to be prepared. You also need to have a platform ready that when the luck finds you, you're ready to take it off. You're ready to,
Yes,
like, you take the luck with you and just fly into the
yes,
stars. And
yeah.
I feel like it was all about your character and how you were always curious about, like, experimenting with different things that eventually got you to where you are today. Because
Mm,
you could have created up a production house or started producing, but if you were still not equipped enough in other skills of drumming, or
mm,
other marketing skills, or other entrepreneur skills, or just, like, just talking skills, if you weren't well
mm.
equipped with those skills, your platform would not have been ready for luck to, like,
Right,
take you all
right.
the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. That is 100% true. And also, you don't know in the beginning which skills will come in handy later. Because just as an example, the biggest door for me opened because one side skill is for me to be able to create websites, which has nothing to do with music. But I just picked that up because I always built the websites for every single one of my bands. And I just, it started out of a necessity, and I got better with every single one. And I don't want to get into too much detail about that stuff because it's a long story, but that skill opened a door for me. Without that door, I could not be where I am today. So you cannot plan that stuff. That's what I'm saying. You can't just take one foot in front of the other. And what you said about the character, I think the I always try to find something that readers and listeners can take away and apply for themselves. And one of the things that I would really say is super important and maybe makes the difference between if it works for you or not is whatever I started, my aspirations were always, well, if I start this now, I can as well be one of the great ones. So when I started working on marketing, I started learning how to do it best. How do the best people do it? And how can I get there too? I didn't just start like how do I don't know, like do a Facebook ad. It's
Mm-hmm.
always about how to do it as great as possible.
As good as possible.
And I mean, otherwise you're not playing with the greats. Otherwise
Yeah,
you're just
yeah,
playing, you
yeah.
know?
And
And
I also think you also need to have the drive and like the determination to be there.
right.
And
Yeah, and you have to be okay to not be there in the beginning. Like when you want to play with the greats, you have to understand that you're not one of them for probably a pretty decent time, you
yeah.
know? You have to be okay to suck, no matter how old you are. But that's exactly the thing. When I say leave the ego aside, um, there's no place for the ego. If you want to go somewhere, you have to understand in the beginning you're not there yet.
So is it safe to say that from the big leagues onto the great leagues, you you made that transition when you launched NeonWave, your production company? Is it safe to say that?
Um, I would rather say, well, I decided in 2016 that I wanted to go the music production road. It was not until 2018 until I felt in a position that my work is even good enough to go public with it. So those 2 years, it's 2 years. We're talking 2 years,
Wow. Mm-hmm.
like try to be famous in 3 months, and if they don't make it, they abandon the careers. So that's the reality. And I'm not the exception with that. That's just how it works on the field. Um, and 2018, I started going public with it, and I met with people and visited, attended workshops, and just did some basic networking. That was not when my career was working out. That was when my career was when I decided I want to have a career. Like it's still years from there until something happens. And you just gotta be realistic and understand that. Um, I would say the big leagues, as you call it, or like the like the end thing for me. Well, the first project, the Universal project I worked on was the Eminem album in 2020. Um, that was the first really, really big project I was involved in. But the start of that project was a connection I made in spring 2018. And then that connection led to a lot of things, ending in all of those big projects.
Wonderful. Amazing. And while checking up the website for your production company, I also saw that you provide opportunities for the younger folks or people who are starting up fresh to grow up into the industry and provide them with a platform. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my NeonWave studio, it's basically it's catering not to like it's two different things. Myself as a producer in the giant projects, if you want to call it that, is not exactly the same thing as what I cater to with my studio. Um, my studio caters to all those artists and bands who wanna tap into that resource of experience and skill that I bring from those big projects. Like, I mean, you have to see how those projects work to understand, like, you have to see the inner workings. And that's kind of my proposition is, well, I have that and I bring that to independent artists who are just starting out, but who have those ambitions. Um, that like it's just um positioned as basically a premium studio. I mean, it's still a music studio and it's one of the I would say the more expensive ones. But yeah, that's the general vision for that. And I also have the NeonWave Club, which is like NeonWave Studio is the studio, and NeonWave Club is a Discord community, which is also for pretty much the same people, artists, producers, engineers who are on the journey, who want to learn, but who are not there yet, or who just want to improve, like we talked about earlier. And I bring them together. I hope to connect them so they can collaborate with like-minded, driven people. Um, I just want to have that platform as a resource for those people as well. And we have all kinds of like, they put new songs in there and ask for feedback, and the community gives feedback. I give feedback sometimes as well. So that's just something I am able to with all the things that go on. But that's something I'm able to dedicate some time to kind of bring that experience and that those skills that I could pick up and kind of give it to that group.
Well, I also read and saw on your website about dorm scholars and musicians peer support groups that you had run in the past. Can you talk a little bit more about those projects that you worked on?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm always trying to do, and it's part of my my job as well, is um or being a freelancer in general, is you have to get the word out because nobody knows about you just because you're good at what you're doing or because you like what you're doing. You have to still work on getting eyeballs on it. And I do a lot of, or I collaborate with other communities a lot who have basically the same target group, but they're not overlapping. It's different people here and there, and we can both benefit from collaborating on stuff and bringing those communities together. And that's what I like to do sometimes, just in the form of a workshop or an instructional video, or I don't know, an exclusive format like a Zoom feedback session with a select group of people. Anything that gets the word out. And well, it's partly PR work as well, like just marketing and PR, because the more people know about the stuff that I'm doing, the more people are aware of it, the more people talk about it. In the end, the more people will be part of my studio and become artists I work with, clients, um, and also success stories, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. I hope so. And I think it's very important, aside it from being a marketing PR, I think it's very important of giving back to the community and giving back to the people who need these experience to learn from. Because definitely, if anyone can join and just like, just have a little bit of chat of the one sort of that we are having, it could be a make a huge impact for someone who's probably trying to learn on their phone, on their laptop, somewhere, anywhere around the world.
Right.
And I think we need more of these things in a world
Mm.
where there are already so many social media applications, gaming applications, different websites. I think aside from that, we also need specially dedicated platforms where people can actually be part of a community and grow and learn from those experiences.
Mm. Yeah. I have to say one more thing though, and I don't know if anybody talks about that stuff usually, but to be completely realistic, um, that stuff takes time and also like effort in thinking about how to structure things, what to do next. Um, it's not, I would not take it for granted as as somebody who needs that stuff. I would not take it for granted that people offer that. And I'm not talking only about me, but in general, people who build something for free, because I'm not a charity, and I'm so honest to say that. I have super high aspirations for my own career, and everything that takes time away from that costs me.
That's true.
Like, you know, and there's only so much energy that I'm willing to give up because just because I have reached a couple things, I don't think puts or anyone like me puts me in a position where I now am obligated to, you know, like um and I'm saying me, but I think that I would never assume that my mentor, who is a great friend, but that he just takes an hour if I need it, to explain something to me or show me how things are done. It's on me. It's always on me. And
Definitely.
if I want time dedicated to myself from someone like that, I better figure out what I can give back first.
That's
So
true.
that's always it's always a give and take, you know, with these communities, they're only so valuable for you as much as you're willing to put in work for yourself as well. Like, don't expect something like the community that I'm building or any other community to do any work for you other than facilitate connections or um, motivating you in a way that you're in a pool with other people who are in the same way. Don't expect like career opportunities from that or somebody discovering you or so, or because that's what people think. Some of them come in and they just spam their links when they put out a new song and they hope someone sees it. And that's usually, I mean, super disrespectful
Yeah.
because you're making use of a channel of someone else who put a lot of work into building that, and you hope to kind of uh, get the best for yourself out of it without giving anything into it. So that's not, or again, like I'm always thinking, who am I talking to? And I'm your listeners, I think when we talk about following your passion, it's super important to understand if you are one of those people who thinks freeloading is a good thing, you will not have a great career with your passion.
Yeah.
And please don't do it. I mean, be respectful and humble and honor the work and effort other people put in something and try to help them instead of having them help you. That's probably the best advice I can give to anyone.
I think that's a wonderful advice because I think that that advice is much required in a world of today where a lot of folks come up with, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of folks come up with the mindset of being entitled that no, I attended this conference, so I should get back this from it.
You have to make yourself valuable first and not hope to get value without putting anything in.
Very true. You have to show what you bring to the table as well as make yourself, I believe, to put it in the easiest terms, stand out in in the bunch, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just the reality. It's nothing like it, I'm not trying to uh teach people how to behave or so that's not what I'm talking about. But with the goal of making something out of your passion, the reality is you have to leave the entitlement out of the door. Because otherwise you will not have a career with your passion.
That's true.
So yeah, we have to talk about that.
Yeah, very true, very true. And now coming up to the topic of how I found about you and how I learned about you, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. And when Midnights came out, we were looking up for ways in which we could collaborate with folks who have worked on that project or on that album. And that's where I learned more about you, and that's how we contacted you and got to know you more. Uh, and it has been a wonderful, wonderful experience having this conversation. Can you tell us more about what songs did you work on in the Midnight album and what your role in the project specifically was?
Yes. So I worked on the tracks, I think it's number one, seven, and eight. Lavender Haze, which is a current single. Maybe not when this episode comes out, but yeah, Lavender Haze, Question, and Vigilante Shit. Those three songs. And I played the drum parts for Question and Vigilante Shit, and another snare part for the Lavender Haze song. That yeah, I my role was instrumentalist on those three songs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And just little briefly, how do these projects work? Because I know that you have your studio in Germany, whereas a
Mm,
lot of these artists are spread around the globe. So how does the whole process work? Where does the feedback come from? And how do you handle the stresses? Because it's of course it was a huge project, it's a huge album.
mm. Right, right. And nobody knew that. Like I was not like I don't know if anyone would have expected the landslide success that the album has now, but I certainly did not
Hmm.
expect that. Um,
I was praying for it. I was praying for it the day it got
oh, thank
released.
you so much.
Yeah.
That helps me a lot.
Mhm.
Um,
Did that come with pressure?
well, you have to have a certain routine of delivering a certain level of work. And I mean, I spent years to gain confidence in my own work, and that certainly comes in handy because I know that what I deliver is solid, you know, and it doesn't matter who the artist is. It's solid because I work on it until it is solid. I just don't stop. Sometimes it takes longer uh, for me to get to the result, or it's a harder job for me to get there. But the fact that I know I'm not sending it off before it's ready probably helps. But that's something you have to build. And the first project that I did, which was the Eminem thing, that I mean, that was the first experience with one of those super major artists. And that felt very different because at that point, I did not have the routine and the experience that I knew my work was great. But again, like you have to do it and you have to do it as good as you can and then a little bit better and rely on the rest kind of working out.
It's important. It's super important to have, I guess, faith in yourself, confidence in yourself, and confidence in the work and the skill that you are producing.
Absolutely. I think the key is really not settling for what you're used to or what feels good to you, but settling for how great can I make it? And if you do that, that is the best you can do. The other thing is not so much the best you can do. That's the best you can do when you feel comfortable. But as long as you have that aspiration of how can I make or only stop when you cannot make it better anymore. That's kind of where I'm getting at. And then it's out of your hands because you could not have made it better.
Are you, when you're working on creative projects, are you looking for feedbacks from your closed ones before finalizing the projects, or is that something that you completely trust yourself with?
Depends on the project. Um, like first of all, I would only ask people for feedback who actually know what they're talking about. As cool as it is to have validation from family or friends or anything, I would not ask them for quality feedback around my job because that's not helpful feedback. That's just taste, you know? Um, but then again, like sometimes I'm not 100% sure in which direction I want to go in certain situations. Not only like we're not talking big projects right now, we're talking everyday projects. And sometimes you just run into a roadblock and you don't know how to overcome it. You don't have an idea. That's usually when I reach out and send that to someone and ask them, look, this is what I have. What do you think? How would you tackle this? And sometimes they have an idea, sometimes they don't. And then you go from there. It's just normal collaboration, I would say.
Makes sense, makes sense. And also to just touch a little bit about the creative process, how do you handle burnout and staying true to whatever you're trying to achieve, and like making sure that you are taking enough breaks that are required to be taken off so that it doesn't start feeling up laggy or burdened like.
Mm. Well, the very honest version is I'm not good at that. Um, in for me, the my aspirations and goals are the most important thing, and usually sometimes at the expense of my health. That's just the way it is, and I will not necessarily change it until I really have to. Um, so when we're talking about stuff like work-life balance or um, having enough breaks or stuff like that, it's difficult for me to say because I always wonder, well, who determines how much breaks you need? Isn't that only something that you train yourself? Like, for example, when you're a runner and you start running, you run 10 minutes and then you're out of breath. After a year of training, you run hours and you're still not out of breath. So, how far can you train yourself? And at what point is it just laziness or, you know, what happens a lot is you encounter situations that you've never seen before and you don't know the solution as easy as the snap of a finger. So that requires effort and it requires work to find a solution. And it's very easy to feel like, oh, I don't want to do that now. It would be so much easier to just pull up Netflix and watch a show and call it making a break, you know? Um, when in fact it's just you not seeing the thing through or not having the inner grit to be able to, and it happens to me all the time. I'm honest, but that's a little bit about how I see the general thing about breaks and all that and burnout. I mean, I have those times as well when I have weeks. Some once I had months, but usually it can be weeks when I feel like I don't really know what I want anymore. I don't like it. It's kind of a burnout leaning state, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to label it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, but at one point that stops and the passion comes back. So, and I can only see that the way I did things took me where I am today, and I'm happy how things are going. So I don't necessarily want to change that now just because burnout is a thing and people talk about it and awareness and all that. For me, my strategy works. And the only important thing is if it's not really detrimental to your long-term health, then keep doing it. That's my
Gotcha.
honest take on it.
Gotcha. Thank you. Is it safe to say that that makes you more self-aware?
Honestly, the burnout feelings only come up when I work on stuff that is not aligned with where I want to go. I can tell
Mm,
you for a fact that I can work 16-hour days for a week easily and not feel burned out at all when that week I work on stuff where I know it takes me exactly where I want to go. Um, the burnout feelings hit me very fast when I'm spending too much time working on things, while at the same time, in the back of my mind, there's always the thought about, well, you should really do that other thing, but you have to do this now because you promised someone, or it's just daily business, whatever. That that puts me towards burnout. So the solution for me is usually when I get too deep into that, I need some change of scenery. Sometimes that's just going away for a couple days. Sometimes it's taking a break from everything and just wandering around town or exploring new places. Um, but the root cause is usually not the amount of stuff I have to do. It's the amount of stuff and time I have to dedicate to things I don't really want to do.
makes sense. Yeah. So basically, if you are interested in a project or if it's something that comes up your way that you know that the end goal is gonna benefit you or gonna take you to wherever your North Star is heading
Mhm.
in that moment, that's when you're completely driven and the burnout doesn't come up because it all just flows naturally for you.
Well, yeah, I might still get lazy at times or just exhausted, but naturally exhausted because concentration, all that stuff takes energy. But it's not the emotional emptiness that you feel when you get close to burnout. It's just I mean, you need to rest. That's true for me as well. But it feels different. It feels like you have a great workout, and afterwards you're also exhausted, but you feel fresh and it feels good exhausted. That's the state you should, I think, aspire to be in. Yeah.
Creativity is a big thing when it comes to burnout. If you're doing something that is related to your goals and your project, but you don't have enough creative freedom, sometimes the irritation starts kicking in. How much do you value creative freedom, and how much do you ask for it when you're working on your own personal projects and when you're working on different projects?
Um, Honestly, I don't think about that. But now when you ask me, the things I do come naturally with a pretty big portion of creative freedom because that's just the nature of what I'm doing. Um, but I don't value it too much at the point where I feel like, or I said it like this in another podcast just the other day. When it's about I want to go somewhere where I not yet am right now. Um, it doesn't, it's not important what I want or how much creative freedom I want or whatever. It's important what needs to be done. That's the only important thing. And like I said earlier, when if I'm working towards that thing where I want to go, that is exactly the only thing I need, knowing I'm getting closer to that. I can hate the work towards that for weeks. It's not a problem at all, as long as every day is a little bit another check mark behind a thing that, like behind a small building block of that. It always comes back to, I don't know. I think you only need all those supportive things when you're not quite in the right place with what you're doing.
That's a very good way to put it through. Like just having the tunnel vision, just having that vision where your end goal is in front of you and just focusing upon that and not worrying about the other things or the distractions bother you.
Right. Yeah. And also it can become like an excuse pretty quickly if you're not careful, like you don't want to do something. It's very easy, especially in our field, and I hear that conversation a lot. It's very easy to say, oh, today I just don't feel creative. I cannot finish that song.
Mm-hmm.
Every seasoned professional will tell you it's not about creativity. It's about creativity is a routine, and you can learn to be creative by the push of a button. But if you use creativity as an excuse to just procrastinate, that's what a lot of people do. It's not, you don't need creativity then or creative freedom. You just procrastinate.
Yeah, you just need a better routine and more focus and more dedication towards like, sticking up to that routine and following it.
Yeah. And also going back to there was a great TikTok video the other day, and it was exactly that. You have to be okay with not always feeling great. It's not necessary to always feel great. It's part of life that moments feel bad. And there is only feeling great if there is also feeling bad because it's two pieces of the same coin. Um, I think that's a trend nowadays as well, that everybody tries to only feel good emotions anymore. And that's, of course, like the opposite of building resiliency, you know?
I I think that again comes up from the very first thing that we started up from, like
Mm,
social media, because social
yeah,
media gives you these slow dopamine hits through
yeah,
like, content that's being posted, and if you don't feel the same way constantly in your life, you start feeling like, oh, something's wrong, something's missing.
right.
But no, like if we all go back to the older teachings when social media technology and all of these things were not around, distractions were
Mm,
not around, a lot of messages were in previous ancient books, histories, is the same. Like we have to learn on how to be comfortable in an uncomfortable environment, in an uncomfortable setting. We have to
yes,
learn different techniques on how we can adjust ourselves, how we can make ourselves more molded into that thing.
right. And that it goes into the conversation about pressure again as well. I mean, nowadays there's so many situations where people tell me, like friends who run their companies and search for employees or stuff, they tell me that younger, like the social media influenced generations, I would say, they're not able to take criticism anymore. Like they get constructive criticism and they start crying because they cannot handle it as grown people, you know? And I don't want to judge that at all, but it's a little bit alarming because uh, life is full of criticism and you need it. I mean, you're not great at everything. You're not the most important person in the world, other than maybe for your parents. It's just normal. And you have to build these, you have to learn coping with these negative emotions. And it's great to sometimes break down. It's okay. It doesn't feel great, but it's super important. And for me, going back to the very beginning of the conversation, when I started playing the drums and I started playing in my village orchestra myself, there was very difficult situations because there was another guy who very early on as a child started bullying, and I was a victim in that situation. You'll learn pretty early on to cope with those kinds of pressure, and if you don't learn that, you will not get very far. It's just as simple as that, as harsh as it sounds, but it's just
Yeah,
being real.
very true. I think it's the whole conversation and the whole interview, I think, encompasses it beautifully. Like, building up our character, building up these little strengths, and making ourselves comfortable in
Mm,
situations that may not be ideal for us,
mm,
and exposing ourselves to these situations, exposing ourselves to different experiences, so that when the luck is about to strike, we have the platform all ready and set to go.
right. You got to be ready. And if you're afraid, for example, of negative emotions or of criticism, anything like that, you will not have luck strike you, because when it strikes you and wants to put you in a position where you don't feel comfortable, which is every position that you were never in before, you will not take it. Like when you get the chance to work on your first giant project, in my example, like the Eminem project, and you expect to have it a smooth ride or feel comfortable throughout or not be criticized or not be in danger of being criticized, you will not take that project. And at the end, you might not even be aware, and in the end always say, well, I'm never lucky. Well, you have to be okay with not feeling great. That's the
Yeah.
one of the biggest things, I would say.
hmm One of the things in my counseling professions when I'm working with kids these days, I see most of the kids having issues around anger, around body dysregulation, and I tell parents and kids the same thing. My job is not to take your anger away from you, because I
Mm,
can't possibly do that. You'll always feel angry, because
right,
that's an emotion that is always gonna be there in your body. But what you can do is you can learn different skills, or equip with yourself with different skills that are going to assist you in situations when you feel angry, or in moments when you feel angry, so that you don't lash out in front of other people, or you don't break someone else's face, but rather you utilize your skills that you have learned. You utilize your breathing exercise, or utilize communicating well, or just learning different things on how you could regulate yourself. And I
right.
feel like even in this field, even in your field, I think it's important to take criticism, important to accept that probably not everything is perfect, and nothing is ever perfect. Like, there is always room for criticism, as long
Yeah,
as it's constructive, as long as nobody is coming on your face and insulting you, or calling you bullying you, or calling you bad names. As long as it's constructive criticism, we should learn on how to take it.
absolutely. And that is the entitlement that we talked about earlier. You have to 100% drop that. Of course, it's like uh, we're not saying that you have to take everything and play yourself down and not protect yourself. That's not what I'm talking about.
So for you to reach there, for you to be there, you have to go through some of these uncomfortable situations, but everyone
Yeah,
goes through them. You have to learn skills, adapt skills, and work through that process.
100%. And it's not a problem. I mean, what happens? Someone is a little rude to you, or you feel, I don't know, you feel like you disappointed someone with your work or with reliability, something like that. What happens? It feels bad for a moment, but so what? Next day is the next day, and things keep going forward, you know? It's just it's just the very tiny moments that we are so afraid of and avoid at all costs. It's not necessary and it's not possible. I mean, the higher your ambitions are, the stronger the people are that you're competing with. And it's even when we talk about music and stuff, everybody is like, oh, it's not competition, it's music, everything is great, and creative expression, no matter how much other people like your music, it's always art. And that's the idealistic approach. The real approach in the business is there is a standard of what is good and what is not. And sometimes you're not meeting that. And it's there is competition around you who are able to take all the shit and be dragged through the mud because they don't care. And if you're not, you're out of the game sooner or later. It's just the way it is.
I would also add up to that, like if you want to do something by yourself, if you feel like other people are not matching up your vision or other people are not onto your standards, or like, your standards are too high, start something yourself. Start your own small project, start a small startup for yourself, put all your energy into it and make that whatever you envision that thing to
Mm,
be. But to accept that while working on projects that has so many different people already working on it, that
mm,
makes it a bit like, I feel like, uncomfortable and difficult.
mm. Yeah, it's different for everyone really. And that's why I'm also saying it's there is no blueprint and also no solution for coping with these situations because everyone's situation is different, like
Everyone,
the foundation.
everyone's journey is completely unique. All experiences are unique. I think
Yeah.
from the most that we can take away from this interview and this conversation is like building up resiliency, building up character, making yourself more aware of situations where you could do better or you can be better, or making yourself learn different techniques and different skills, and
Yes.
also learning on how you can be comfortable in uncomfortable environments. And again, all that comes up down to building up your character and resiliency.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's super important skills, and you cannot get along without them. It's just simple as that. I mean, I don't know how I would. It's
Yeah.
yeah. And
Uh,
and it's not easy. Like it's sometimes listening to these conversations can feel like, okay, they know what how that works, but I don't. So I'm not the person. This is not a fixed state. Like every single situation that I encounter, or probably you encounter too, is another learning experience to build those soft skills. It's not you have resiliency or not, you're resilient or you're not. That's not the thing. But you can choose in every situation to build that and expose yourself to situations that are uncomfortable with the intention, okay, now I want to feel that uncomfortable feeling because I want to learn to cope with uncomfortable feelings. And the more I do it, the less uncomfortable it becomes. Um, I just wanted to add that so people don't have the feeling, well, I'm so far away from that scenario that they're describing, I will never get there. No, that's not the thing. You can start today with the first step, and tomorrow is the second, and maybe even the third. And sooner than later, you'll learn because it becomes an upward spiral and it becomes easier and easier and easier. And suddenly it's part of your personality, and then you don't have to think about it at all.
Yeah, always start up slow. Start up with small goals, short goals that are achievable, so that when you start achieving up those goals, those small steps, you become more encouraged, and then you can slowly start building it into a routine, slowly start building into a character, and without
Right.
even you knowing it, you'll be fully fledged, like within a few weeks, as long as you're consistent and as long as you're keeping up with it.
100%. That's exactly it. Yeah. You have to start where you are. You cannot start somewhere else. You have to start where you are.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you so much, Dom, for taking out the time of speaking with us. I'm extremely, extremely grateful for having this conversation. And I
Anytime.
wish you all the best in all the projects that you do. I hope we stay connected, and I hope we have more conversations in the future as we as Rozarte also grow up, and you and your profession even make giant and greater strides. And thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you so much for your invitation. I enjoyed this talk a lot. And definitely keep me posted on what's coming up, when this is coming up, and everything else that's coming up in the future with your project. I think you have a great mission with your magazine and the whole Rozarte startup.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Much appreciated.